program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the Eau Claire Area School Board. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
Good evening. We're going to resume our open session. It's 7 o'clock. Just to brief the attendance, we convened at 5 o'clock and we had to meet in closed session to address certain issues that need to be addressed in closed session. We just finished that session. Now we are here to continue with business in open session. So to continue with the agenda, I'll invite you to please, if you're able, stand. Pledge of Allegiance will be offered. Tonight's student pledge leader is Kara. Kara, did I say it right?
Yep.
Kara Reeby, daughter of Caleb and Shannon Reeby. Kara is a third grader from Sam Davey Elementary. Principal Eisenhuth said Kara is a terrific example of what makes Sam Davey Elementary such a great school. She is very smart, works hard, and has the courage to overcome any challenge. She's also funny, a great friend, and willing to help others whenever she can. Mr. Eisenhuth said Kara leads by example, and he is proud that she is a Sam Davey Dolphin, and we are very proud of you. Would you lead us in the pledge tonight?
I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. The next point in the agenda is the public forum. Tonight we didn't have anyone that signed up, so we will move to the next item, which is the superintendent's report. Dr. Hardwick.
Thank you. So tonight I want to begin by reviewing the upcoming school board events, of which there are just a few. February 4th, which is tomorrow, is the meeting of the Family Advisory Council, and it meets at 7 p.m. February 11th, there's a meeting of the Policy and Governance Committee, which meets at 8 a.m. On February 11th, there's also a meeting of the Budget Development Committee at 1:30 p.m., followed by a meeting of the LEAP Committee at 4 p.m. And then on February 17th, there's another meeting of the school board at 7 p.m. And all of these meetings take place in the administration building. So tonight I have a couple of recognitions and some updates for you about what we learned at the WASB convention. And I want to begin with recognizing our students. Recently, students from North High School in Mrs. Amiot's AP English class participated in the Mahmoud S. Taman Foundation's essay contest focusing on the theme Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. 8 of the students received a $300 award for each of their essays. And I'm going to call the students' names, and I'd like for you to stand up. Quentin Hobble, Singyi L. Her, and you can keep standing so people can see you. Eliza Weigel, Sing Mua, Aria Height, Ablika Yor, Danielle Luer, and Nakia Tillery. Are you all here? Okay. And is Mrs. Amiot here? Is she? Well, we're glad you're here, and we congratulate all of you for working so hard and exploring difficult and complex topics. And I know that your essays required a great deal of self-reflection, and that those essays have been described to me as being very powerful, so I look forward to reading them. Congratulations. The Family Advisory Council met on January 7th, and they reviewed a draft of the 2020-21 calendar, and they have provided feedback, which you will hear tonight. They also received a presentation on the district budget, and there was a great deal of discussion about teacher and sub shortages and the need to recruit and retain highly qualified people at all levels in our organization. We also talked about the positive impact that teachers have on student growth, and that sometimes we don't see that growth for that impact for many years, but nevertheless it is there. The fact will meet again tomorrow night, and we will be talking about a possible app for the district in terms of scheduling of activities and information coming out, and what the parents might want to see and families might want to see on that app. And we'll also be getting an update on social emotional learning. Throughout the month of February, ECASD schools will be celebrating Black History Month. This week is School Counseling Week. Counselors make a huge difference in the lives of students, helping with social emotional learning, academic and career planning, and so very much more. We want to say thank you to all of our counselors in the school district, and we especially want to say thank you to Dr. Kaiying Zhang, who is the Director of Student Services and works with the counselors to coordinate the wonderful counseling staff we have. Next week is Wisconsin School Bus Driver Appreciation Week, so please consider having your students say a special thank you to bus drivers when they enter or exit the bus. It doesn't hurt for community members to thank them as well. We very much appreciate the care with which our bus drivers tend to our students, and they refer to our students as their very precious cargo. And they do a wonderful job in terms of providing a safe experience for our students every day. February 24th through 28th is We Love Our Public Schools Week, which is sponsored by the Wisconsin Public Education Network, and they have a number of activities going on during that week. They'll be working with the Chippewa Valley retired teachers in terms of doing some particular walks in the morning sessions to show what a positive impact our schools have on our community. I wanted to talk to the board about a little bit about some of the information that we received at the state conference, particularly in the area of teaching reading. State Superintendent Carolyn Stanford Taylor has recently endorsed explicit phonics instruction as a critical component in teaching students to read. The Department of Public Instruction is currently developing materials and supports to help districts determine if current reading instructional materials are aligned with the state standards. In what appears to be a first, the Department of Public Instruction is endorsing explicit phonics instruction as a critical component in teaching reading. And the department said that at the state education conference that it's developing materials and supports aimed at helping school districts determine whether their reading instructional materials are aligned with state standards and what to do if they are not. So some of you may or may not know that in ECASD, we have spent almost the last 3 years analyzing our reading data, looking at the research on reading, talking with teachers about the needs that they feel are necessary to improve reading instruction in the school district, and looking at how our instructional practices align with state standards and address explicit phonics instruction at the elementary levels, particularly pre-K through third grade. As a result, we have made changes to the way that we teach reading, and a significant part of our work has been in providing professional development in how to enhance phonics instruction and how to draw on the materials that we already have in place to provide that instruction. Our focus now is on providing support to students and teachers and using those best instructional research-based practices that are shown to be the most effective in teaching reading. So I think we're all excited about the news coming out from DPI. It appears that we're maybe a little bit ahead of many in the state in taking this approach, and we are looking forward to updating the board and our community in late February or early March about the work that is taking place to improve reading in our school district. So that is my report for the time being, but I will have another announcement after the employment report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hardebeck. The next point in the agenda is the board president's report. Tonight, I would like to share two items. The first one, I was able to attend, as well as Dr. Hardebeck, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. That was during the last week of January. And I had the opportunity to share with other school board members throughout the state. And I was also happy to hear good news of good things going on in the state. But I would just like to highlight three things that are of concern. The first one is that our resolution that had the language to invite other districts to eliminate the use of Native American imagery as mascots did not go through. It was voted down with a significant margin, which speaks volumes about the intense work that needs to be done in terms of helping others understand equity, inclusion, and diversity in our not just curriculum, but in our practices as school boards. So there you go. We have an important item in the agenda to work in the next few months in terms of advocacy. The second item for concern would be how hard it was to approve a resolution that contained language that would encourage boards of education throughout the district, throughout the state, to have third parties that work with them sign an EDI statement in the way we do here in Eau Claire. That resolution was passed, but passed with a very small margin. So still good news, but the conversation and the discussion took longer than it really should have. And the third point was the large impact on our budgets at the state, both at the state and local level, of the school choice program. It just keeps growing, and there was concern and questions about how and when that could be stopped. That's another item that we need to pay attention to in terms of advocacy. The second item that I wanted to share with you is give you an update of the superintendent search. As you know, we have had a number of listening sessions, 3 of them housed at each of the middle schools. And we had attendance and an opportunity to engage with parents and faculty and community members about the search process. There have been also other meetings held at central office with staff, principals, and meetings held in the school buildings themselves. All of them with good conversation and a lot of good feedback for us board members to both shape the job description and also to shape the questions that we would present to the candidates. As you know, we decided to do the search process on our own without the need to hire a consultant agency. And we have good news. Thanks to the leadership of Dr. Lori Bika and with the help of Ms. Maida Miski, we have a strong platform where all the documentation that has been facilitated by candidates is of easy access to all the board members. The board members are the search committee, and that has been a lot of work that needs to be acknowledged. Thank you very much, and congratulated. We also have a very robust number of applications in front of us. Just to give you an idea of how competitive the field is, Dr. Bika has reported that Green Bay has 25 applications in their process, in their search process. La Crosse has 26 applications in their process. Madison has 31 applications in their process. Eau Claire has 37 applications, which is the highest number of applications we have been able to identify, which speaks to the interest that our opening has awakened in the larger community. Also, to remind you that the board has completed 2 training sessions, one in ways to become aware of implicit bias, which is important for us at the time that we are interviewing candidates. And also, we completed another training session about where do we need to focus, what kind of behaviors and elements we need to be looking at when we are reading materials and also interviewing candidates. Both training sessions have been led by professionals in the community that have volunteered their time. Our next steps include, now that the priority deadline has been met, which was January the 31st, we will meet to make sure that we are all understanding in the same way the criteria that has been defined as minimum requirements and desired requirements. And then we will proceed with the process of categorically eliminating those who do not meet the requirements, and then proceed to identify those who we would like to interview by phone, and from that pool identify those who we would like to meet and interview in person. But once we identify those who we want to meet in person and interview in person, listening sessions will be put in place so that all stakeholders, principals, parents, community members, students can meet the candidates to make questions, and that will be an important piece for us to receive feedback from all those who attend those meetings. So pay attention, those developments will come soon, and that's all that I have to report tonight. The next point in the agenda is student representative report. Morgan.
Hello, I have a short report for you guys tonight. I'd like to start with some athletic updates. Gymnastics beat both Hudson and Rice Lake. Boys swim and dive won against Chippewa and will be competing in the conference meet this Saturday. Wrestling, Memorial Wrestling beat North in a crosstown match. Girls hockey beat both Hudson and Hayward. And boys hockey won against Rice Lake and will be competing against Chippewa and River Falls later this week. MHS Improv will be hosting their 3rd show of the season on Valentine's Day. The show will feature a special performance from the MHS Breakdancing Club, as well as music from Memorial student and DJ Tristan Splichell. The Old Abe Memorial Show Choir and Show Band has made finals at both of their January competitions, placing 5th at Colby High School and 4th at La Crosse High School. Several individuals also won awards, including a duo that earned the title of the best ensemble at the show. And that's all for my report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Our next point in the agenda is school board committee reports. And we'll begin tonight with budget.
Well, I don't believe budget is met since our last meeting, but we do have a meeting coming up on February 11th at 1 p.m.
Thank you very much. LEAP?
LEAP has not had a meeting since our last meeting, but we have one coming up.
Thank you. Demo and trends?
Our next meeting, my calendar is correct, is February 13th, so next Thursday, 4:30.
Thank you. And P&G? That will be me. We are crafting language to modify our policy to be more explicit about our relationship with the Foundation for Public Schools, and we will be bringing a proposal for full board consideration in the next few in the next few weeks. We have changed our meetings to Tuesday mornings, right? On the week the board has session. Is that right? The opposite? Okay. On the week opposite to full board sessions. That's my report. Thank you. Next point in the agenda is the legislative update.
Thank you. So, as Dr. Torres mentioned, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards Annual Delegate Assembly was January 22nd. Thank you, Dr. Torres, for serving our board and district in that way as our delegate. He mentioned a couple of the resolutions. If you'll remember, we supported all of the resolutions that went forward. All of them except for the one regarding Native American mascots passed. If you're interested in looking back at what those were, they're available to see at wasb.org or in the board docs files from our January 6th meeting. In Madison, the Assembly Committees on Education will hold public hearings this Thursday on 7 different bills related to dyslexia. WASB actually opposes a number of these bills, not on any grounds related to serving students with dyslexia, but because they introduce a number of unfunded mandates for districts. Additionally, the committee on the same day will hold hearings on Assembly Bill 810, which adjusts how districts transmit financial information to the Department of Public Instruction, and Assembly Bill 779, which deals with participation in extracurriculars by virtual charter students. Contact your representatives and tell them to support public schools.
Call them a lot. Thank you very much. We will adjourn to committee, and after each report is presented, did I miss one point? Oh yes, I'm sorry. We're going to go to consent resolution agenda. We will consider the approval of the consent resolution agenda items. For the consent agenda, the board has been furnished with background material on each item or has discussed it at a previous meeting. This will be acted upon with one vote without discussion. If a board member wants to discuss any item, it will be pulled out from the consent agenda and voted on separately. So the first item in the consent agenda is minutes of January 20, 2020, and the Human Resources Employment Report. I will need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Harder, and the second.
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Klinkhammer. Those, we'll do a roll call.
Commissioner Klinkhammer,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Torres,
Yes?
Commissioner Vu,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordin,
Yes.
Commissioner Vika,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder.
Yes.
The consent agenda has been approved. Thank you very much. Now we can adjourn to, oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Harder has an announcement.
So
I'm aware of my
So with your approval of the consent agenda and the employment report tonight, you approved the retirement of Dr. Tim O'Reilly. And Tim O'Reilly is here. Dr. O'Reilly, would you stand up, please? Thank you. So Dr. O'Reilly began his career in the Eau Claire Area School District in 1988. He taught 6th grade at Mount Washington School in Eau Claire from 1988 to 1990, and during the 1990-91 school year, he taught 6th grade again at South Middle School. In 1992, Dr. O'Reilly became the assistant principal at DeLong Middle School. He worked as the assistant principal from 1992 to 2007. In 2007, Tim became the principal at DeLong Middle School and has been in that role ever since. Dr. O'Reilly has a Bachelor of Science degree in elementary education from the University of Wisconsin, La Crosse. He has a Master of Science degree in education administration from Winona State University. He also has a doctorate in educational policy and administration from the University of Minnesota. Dr. O'Reilly holds Wisconsin teaching licenses at the elementary and middle school level in social studies and has coached athletics as well as his administrator license as a principal. So today we were talking, as we were both retiring this year, and our over 100 years together of always starting every year with the school year and always going with the bells and always being in school. So you celebrate your 50 years plus, and I'll celebrate my 50 plus years. But the service that you have given to the school district has been exceptional. I think that you are known for the deep relationships and positive relationships that you build, not only with your families and with your students, but also with your colleagues. And Tim, we wish you the very, very best. I know this was a difficult decision for you, but now you're going on to that next chapter, and you're going to love it. So, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hardwick, and thank you, Dr. O'Reilly. Now we can adjourn to committee. After each report, there will be an opportunity for the audience to make questions if needed. The first report is a review for the recommendation of the 2020-21 school year calendar.
Good evening. Both Jim Schmidt and I will be sharing some information tonight about the proposed 2020-2021 calendar. Say that fast a couple of times. Hopefully we won't have too many errors with that this evening. So first of all, just a quick reminder about the calendar committee. If you recall, for the past couple of years, when we've presented the proposed calendar, that information has been brought to you based upon the surveys that go out each year and the positive feedback that we get from both the staff survey as well as the family surveys that go out and the comments that we receive in those surveys that are favorable to the annual calendar. Last year with the snow day situation, when we needed to figure out how to bring that calendar together to make up those days, at that point in time it was suggested by the calendar committee that we bring everybody back together again and we start to annually review the calendar with the calendar committee again, the way that we had done originally once the calendar was drafted. So This is the first year, again, that we brought everybody back together and kind of started from scratch to make sure that what we're doing with the calendar still meets the original needs that it was intended for. And so you can see that the list of calendar committee members that worked on presenting the information that's before you tonight is listed up on the screen. So those are our calendar committee members for the proposed calendar. In addition, the information that's being presented includes input and feedback from obviously the calendar committee, the family advisory council that Dr. Hardebeck talked about earlier. The information was presented to the building level principals, as well as the professional supports and for educators committee, which is significant related to the partnership with the university. And then the ECAE Meet and Confer committee also had input related to the calendar and provided their feedback related to any issues that they might see with the proposed modifications to the calendar. Each year we share with you the logistics of the calendar, things that we make sure are included either legally or just by virtue of making sure that the calendar includes specific items. So again, this year the proposed calendar has 189 teacher contract days. There's 170 elementary school instructional days. There's 172 instructional days for both middle school and high school. There are enough minutes to absorb inclement weather days at all levels. Elementary has many more minutes, to absorb more than the 4 days because there's just a different requirement for instructional minutes at the varying levels. But for all levels, we have enough minutes built into the calendar to absorb at a minimum 4 inclement weather days. There's one professional development and instructional planning day that we identify in the calendar as the 5th inclement weather day should we need it. And I'm not going to say anything about the fact that it's been a great year and we're not going to need it because last year, nothing hit until February. So we're not going to go there this year. And then also on the calendar, we have 9 professional development and instructional planning days, 4 which happen prior to the year and then 5 which are embedded in the school year. And then Maida, if we could have the actual calendar. I don't know how to, Maida, you're a rock star. Look at how you make that happen. So Mr. Schmidt is going to walk us through the modifications from our current calendar to this calendar and how things might look a little bit different.
Maida, can I control it from here? Okay, I just was shifting it around. No, that's all right. All right, so some of the significant changes that have been made. The first is that there are 6 days, and we mentioned this in your memo, 6 days before the start of the school year. Because of the way the school year starts on September 1, we cannot start before then. It turns out that if you start on the 24th, you can actually have a 6th day in there. For a variety of reasons that we mentioned in the memo, including an opportunity for training, we moved the May Professional Development Day into that bucket. So there's 6 blue squares on August instead of 5. And that also solves some other issues for us in terms of timing, as we mentioned with in the memo with educator effectiveness and the timing of the year. It just comes too quick. So it turned out to be an advantage for us to be able to move that date to meet those training needs, plus the fact that the day in May just wasn't working out this coming year with the way the year finished. The next change is the sliding up in October. And then maybe if we can see October, November, there we go. So one of the things at the elementary level we like to try to do is have the communications with families happen on the first 2 communications within 6 weeks and then 6 weeks again. So with the October PDIP and conferences happening at the end of the month, it put us at an 8 weeks and then 4 weeks until we report to families. This now makes it a 6 weeks for conferences and then 6 weeks for grades. So it spaces it out as it originally had been several years ago. So there isn't anything different about that there's a gray day, a red day, and a blue day in October. It's just slid up 2 weeks. November, December, January, February are pretty much the same. The big difference that we get to the last one is when we get to April, or end of March, is spring break. And as we mentioned, the feedback we got from families last year was don't go back-to-back weeks where we have a weird schedule. Try to consolidate it as much as you can. And so we pushing, because Good Friday is on the first Friday in April, to have spring break be the last week instead of the second to last week of March. That decision or recommendation is being brought forward to you. We did share that also with, we have a committee member, as I mentioned in the memo, from UW-Eau Claire, and the response, when we talked about the mismatch, there wasn't a concern, but that was one member of the organization, doesn't represent the whole organization. It is also something that we did in 2012 and 13, was we did have a mismatch between UW-Eau Claire and the districts about 8 years ago for similar reasons where the schedule just lined up that way. And then if you go down to the end of the year, as we mentioned, this does allow us those buffer days in June, with the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th being backup snow days. Summer school would start on the 14th. We have the same scenario this year, this coming summer. We have the same scenario as we do in the summer after this calendar, in that the 4th of July lands on a weekend, which makes it having a 9-week summer program actually works out pretty well. It's once the year after that, it'll get a little bit more complicated because the 4th of July will be back into the week, and that makes it a little bit more, that tends to be a dead week for us on trying to schedule summer school things, but with it in the summer, it allows us to at least run normal programming, more condensed, and allow us that week of a breather before we start the summer program on the 14th. All right, and then questions that you have.
Questions from board members? Dr. Beacon?
So I did receive email today about the spring break issue with UW-Eau Claire, and the messages were essentially they're the same, that there are so many families that are connected with both organizations, and that it, whether it be spouses or children, or and that in many communities where there is a university, that the district and the university align. So university employees can't take personal days or vacation days. So there would be a loss of a spring break opportunity together with one's family.
I received the same email. When you said there was a mismatch, what do you mean by mismatch?
Trying to remember the context.
The spring breaks from the school district and the university.
Oh, you mean by aligning with it would put us, by aligning ours with the week of Good Friday, it puts ours off by 1 week. There's a mismatch, and then because the UW-Eau Claire already sets theirs based independent of the holiday or that particular week. So it just puts if we were to choose to line it up so that we had it the week of Good Friday, that creates the mismatch.
Because they don't follow the religious calendar to
UW-Eau Claire? No. And the reason why we're off on Good Friday is state statute requires that from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. if we allow our staff to attend religious observations if they choose. So that's typically why that's the primary reason why we are off on Good Friday.
So, any other question from board members? Yeah, Commissioner Lyons?
Thank you. Is this an anomaly? Is this, as a principal, do you try to align the two weeks together? So, in the 21-22 academic year, would this be something that you could address?
Yeah, and the biggest driver, yes, typically, but the biggest driver, again, for this was the feedback from families about not wanting to have us off for a week and then turn around the next week and have another shortened week where they have to have childcare coverage. So that was the message that we heard the prior year when we met with the families was they want us to consolidate, because we'd have a lot of 3-day weekends, and we thought, hey, we're giving you a lot of short weeks, and they told us, please stop doing that, please consolidate those weeks off into one longer weekend, because every time that there's a different schedule that requires us to create childcare coverage, and that was the primary motivation for having that, is we could have Good Friday and then find another day in the calendar. It had to be on a different week, but then we just create that challenge for families to try to find that coverage.
Any other questions from board members? Any questions from the audience? Hearing none, then we'll thank for the report and move on to the next item of the agenda. The next item in the agenda is the OPEB report. And who will present this report?
I think the Budget Development Committee is going to present it.
Okay. The Budget Development Committee.
I'll speak to it as chair of the Budget Committee, although as noted here, I was not present for this, but I think this is all in line with something we talked about. So, but you...
hope so.
Yeah, I think so. Dr. Bika, Dr. Nordin, please let me know if you have anything to add to this. This is on the topic of sort of expressing our intentions as a current board to the wider staff about how we intend to deal with OPEB over the coming months, and is just basically a recommendation about how to proceed with OPEB that we would like the board to consider and ideally to pass so that we could get this communication over to the staff. So sorry, let me just jump ahead if this works.
Would you like me to run the remotes while you talk so you don't have to think about both?
Well, I'm just not sure. Okay. Oops, I pushed the wrong button. There we go. I'll try it again. Bottom left. Well, if you could just, yeah, I think the big one is, well, yeah, thanks. And then the third point here, the first two I sort of covered. The third point is that we do have an actuarial study. We have, the board will recall that we had some changes to OPEB earlier this year that we voted on and approved, and the actuarial study sort of assessing what the likely impact of those changes will be is part of the overall picture of what we're going for. Now this is complete. We'll be looking at it, I think, in the next meeting or two coming up in the next month or so. If we can go to the next slide, I think this is the kind of the meat of the agenda point here, which is we worked with some different variations on this language just to sort of I'll just stop for a second and explain that it's difficult for a board to say what we're going to do because we may change drastically, and even without changing membership we may change drastically, but in addition to that we may change membership. But what we're trying to do here is to to communicate some intentions and some recommendations for future boards to follow. So they are not, however, bound to follow any of these, and we intend to make that clear as part of the communication as well to the wider staff. But so as I said, we went through a couple different variations on the language. And I think, yeah, the recommendation is the third one here, which gives, basically what it does is we're trying to create some comfort for staff to know that should changes happen to OPEB, they'll happen with lots of notice, plenty of notice. And this is the fiscal year wording here that we used, that we felt best conveyed that intention. So in fact, I don't know if, I think you were one of the original authors of this particular approach to it, Dr. Nordin. I don't know if you want to speak to it a bit. Just sort of the fiscal year and some of the language. Great, appreciate it.
We just went back and forth trying to be as clear as possible for both the staff, so that when we talked about the 12-month grace period, it was, well, when is that from the moment that we make a decision as a board or a future board would make that decision, or is it 12 months from January 1st, or which also presented some potential issues for accounting or the retirement deadlines. And so we decided to go in the end with the fiscal year grace period, because that starts July 1st, which would then, it wouldn't potentially interfere with the retirement deadlines. So staff members that may be considering retirement would have plenty of time to weigh that decision before deciding whether to retire. And then between the second draft and our final, we simply just added a little bit of language that hopefully communicates more fully to answer some of those questions that staff may have. I'm going to actually just read it just so it's on the record. This board has concluded its changes to OPEB, health, dental, and stipend for the 2019-2020 school year. This board also recommends that any future changes to OPEB which may be enacted include a minimum of a full fiscal year grace period. Changes enacted during a fiscal year would not be applied earlier than the end of the following fiscal year. So that would give people that were affected by OPEB and considering retirement, if we or a future board were to make a change, they would have not only the remainder of the current fiscal year made a decision, but then the full year following. So we would hope that that would reduce some stress about, well, if I don't decide to retire this year, is my benefit going to disappear before next year? And in this case, we recommend, as the Budget Development Committee, and should we decide to do this communication as a board, we recommend that they would have always that full fiscal year to do so. So we felt, I think, like this was a good balance between the central office and the accounting and the retirement, but also giving staff a good opportunity to weigh that and make the best decision for their own futures.
Thanks, Tim. And so then on the last slide, really the question here for the board is how would the board like to proceed with this communication, if at all? And again, the Budget Committee's recommendation is that we use that third language, the third example of the language, but we'd like to put it to the board.
Thank you very much. Any questions from board members? What are the nuances from each statement? And how are those important?
Well, we were trying to sort of, I think one of the changes from the first and second drafts to this final draft was to sort of genericize it a little bit, and disconnect it from 2019-2020. I think it's fair to say that we agreed that this kind of grace period is a good way to approach retirement benefit changes whenever possible. Mm-hmm. And so I think as a kind of a standing recommendation, it works in that regard. I don't know what the other reasons might have been that others think of that we...
Again, there was just some question from the 12-month period about, is that 12 months from the day that the board votes? Does that mean it waits until January and then it's 12 months? How might that align with the accounting calendar, the fiscal year calendar? And so switching it over in the first one to the second one, I think literally the only difference is instead of it says 12-month grace period, it says full fiscal year grace period. And it was simply because that seemed to set a point that didn't seem to interfere in any way with the decision in February about retirement, mm-hmm. and made it clear for the central office for their accounting, mm-hmm. When it would go into effect. And then the nuance that it's like Aaron said, it's really just to provide a little extra information and to try to head off some potential questions about when it says full fiscal year, can you change it on, in the first meeting in July and then it goes into effect immediately? And that recommendation is no, we would say whatever fiscal year it would win, we would recommend that it wait until the end of the following fiscal year. So you would have, at the minimum, almost 13 months to consider a change, and that would be only if we made a change to OPEB in a June of a year.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Klinkhammer.
So I'm just thinking about this, and I'm wondering if Should this really be a recommendation from the Budget Development Committee rather than the board? Because I think if it comes from the whole board, should it, I mean, are you thinking about this at a policy level or just like, here's what the board is thinking about? If it's a policy issue, then I think it needs to go before policy and governance. If it's just what the Budget Development Committee is recommending, then I think it should say the Budget Committee recommends versus the whole board recommends. So I guess that's, you know, what do you intend this message to be? Is it supposed to be just a signaling to our staff, or is it supposed to be actual policy on behalf of the board?
We did talk about that quite a bit in the committee, and I think we concluded, as I certainly did, that it really can't be policy. And so we weren't sure exactly the form, you know, to be frank, weren't sure of exactly the ideal form for this to take as a communication. As I sort of prefaced, it's an expression of the, you know, I think ideally it would be some kind of expression of the intention of the current board, and also of the recommendation, from the perspective of a recommendation of the current Budget Development Committee as well. Now, the question of how that impacts policy, how it applies to policy, I actually don't have the answer to that question. I don't know, but I'm happy to, I would be happy for this to move forward in some form. I think the important thing is to help strengthen certainty about what the future holds, while being clear that we cannot guarantee what the future holds.
Right, right. So I guess that's why I think maybe what it should be is the because you're not trying to bind the board in any way, maybe it really should be the Budget Committee recommends X, the Budget Committee says X, rather than giving the impression that the entire board is sort of bound by, I mean, I don't know, maybe that's just a way to sort of make it clear that this isn't policy that future boards are bound to and that type of thing.
I'm open to, yeah, I'm open to that spin on it, or whatever spin on it we can put on it. That, I mean, it's good to have, if there's a way to, for the current board to weigh in and say, well, we agree with this recommendation, but without making it policy, I think that would be a valuable thing for staff. If we don't see a way to do that, then I'm certainly open to other approaches.
If I may just add that, if the Budget Committee does not bring it to the board for discussion, then the board loses the chance of understanding what's going on regarding money. So there is a need for a board as a whole to be aware of financial situation that has implication to the fiscal responsibility of the district. So I like the idea that the board is informed, but I also like the idea that the board doesn't need to be involved in the detailed discussion of the committee.
I guess that, thank you. I guess I wonder if that doesn't create confusion, though. So in communicating something that could likely not be binding, if the decision at a later point is anything that is not in alignment with this, have we not miscommunicated?
Any other commentary? Yeah, Commissioner Harder.
I guess I wouldn't characterize it as miscommunication if it's a recommendation about how to deal with it, and if it's presented as nothing more than that, as this is the intention of the current board, then the board agrees at some level that we'd like to stick to this, if possible. I think, again, it's not about guaranteeing anything. I think that needs to be clear to all parties involved in the conversation. It's not about guaranteeing anything, it's about communicating intention, which I don't know how we do from a policy level. I don't even know if it's possible, but we do see some value in it in our discussions in the committee, and so we wanted to bring it to the larger board to consider.
So what I'm hearing is that the text would be something like, the budget development recommends that the board concludes its changes to OPEB and, right? And then the board approves it, I guess, in our next session to conclude its changes to OPEB for the 2019-20 school year, because that's the purpose, right? Am I right? Am I understanding right? Yes? Oh, you have your light on?
Go ahead, I can go next.
Commissioner Bika?
So I know something at the last Budget Development Committee that we talked about was building it into the workflow so that annually the budget, whoever's serving on budget development would bring this, bring this to the board and it would be recognized. And so that employees of the district knew on would have this on an annual basis. And of course it can always change in the future, but it would be something that would be revisited on a predictable schedule. It would be built into that committee's work.
Very good. Dr. Nortin?
I'd also say that I think putting in the Budget Development Committee recommends actually weakens the statement, because then it's 3 out of the 7 of us that are speaking to say this is how we see OPEB going, rather than, it's a communication of intent of this board to say we're finished with OPEB changes for this current year, and we think that in the future we should do it this way. Again, it's not binding. We're not looking to make it policy. If Policy and Governance wants to take that up and think about it, that's fine. But our intention was simply for us as a group to be able to say, this is where we are, so that the staff knows where we are, and this is how we think we'd like to apply it going forward. And again, bringing it back annually for future boards to continue that. So I actually think that, I appreciate what you're saying about the Budget Development Committee, but I think our goal was for the group of us to say, this is where we are for this year and where we'd like to go forward. Not just a small subset of us, but that all of us, or whatever chunk of us would vote to support such a thing, support this intention.
Commissioner Harder?
Yeah, I'm just reading it from the perspective of policy, and of course if it went to P&G, there's no saying exactly how it may be altered, but I'm just looking at it from the perspective of policy and considering if it would be possible. But I thought I might just turn the question to those of you on policy and governance, and what does this look like the basis of a policy, or does it seem very different to you in the nature of what it's trying to do? Can you see a way to make it policy, I guess? Let's leave aside the question whether you agree with it for a second. So let's say we all do. Is there a meaningful way to make policy out of it that you can see?
Commissioner Klinkheimer, you want to respond to that?
I'd want to think about that a little bit, I guess, but my initial gut reaction is I wouldn't want it to be policy. And I think that once you start institutionalizing things like this, in the sense of every year we say we're done with OPEB, then that starts to become policies. I mean, I worry about losing flexibility in those conversations, I guess, if you try to make this too rigid. I think the budget is a big, difficult topic, of course, and I would want to preserve as much flexibility in that conversation as you could. I think that you would go down a difficult path if you tried to make this some type of policy. That's my gut reaction to it.
Commissioner Harder?
And that was really our same conclusion, is how do you make something policy that talks about what a future board will do? And so we kind of came to the same place of, well, it's something we want to communicate to staff as an intention, and so this is kind of, it is the the Budget Development Committee recommendation. We have at least that much. Question is, should we try to make it into something more?
Sure, I'm sorry, yes, this is what I'm hearing. This is a recommendation that is coming from Budget Development, right? and we will receive it as a board, and then the board will vote and approve it. When you vote and we approve it, then it's a board. It's no longer a budget development recommendation, right? Does that make sense? Was that the intention? Would that be the intention?
Yes, to communicate a larger board intention.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So, does anyone have a repair or doubt about how we will proceed?
Like,
Or you, Commissioner Harder?
I guess if we vote, I'm wondering what we're voting on.
We're not going to vote tonight.
Yeah, but if we vote, what would we be voting on?
To accept the recommendation of the budget development.
Simply to accept it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not, doesn't mean it turns into policy, doesn't
No.
just,
No,
it
it's
sounds like
just for
it-
1920.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be great to vote on that question.
At least that's what I am understanding, is do you have the same understanding? Yes. Because in these matters, we want to be as flexible as possible. We don't want to make a policy decision when we don't know really what's going to happen next year in terms of economy, large picture. So, good. So we will have this included in the agenda for our next session. Good? Everyone happy? Very good. We can move forward then. Thank you very much for the recommendation. That's it for our committee reports. Now we will adjourn to work session. We have a work session planned for tonight, and we have 3 items that could be as long as you want to make them. But we don't have to make it too long. It's already 8:03, so we can get started. Our first item is referendum planning, and we have some materials prepared for us. And who will present this one?
So I'll start out.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
So we prepared 3 timelines for you, which you have seen and made it. Can you bring those up? Yes, yes, it's a little fuzzy. Yeah. See if I can- So, thank you. Mine's fuzzy too. So the first referendum timeline is a shorter one, and it is the shortest one that you could do, having going to referendum in November 2020. This would be somewhat of very straightforward referendum to address the needs that were left out of the last referendum. Essentially, the South renovation, the Roosevelt renovation, and any other things that you might want to talk about in terms of capacity or getting the beginning of a needs assessment about the Southside elementary schools. You can see on the left-hand side that it gives you the days before the election as a guidepost of the kind of points that you would need to hit in order to meet your election deadline. Coming up with a question for that, yes, thank you. Coming up with a question for the referendum sometime in the summer of 2020. So it's a very short timeline. The next one is a more, I guess, a moderate medium timeline and takes you out to April. It would allow you to have more conversation with the community. It would allow you to do a deeper dive into a needs assessment, particularly with some of our overcrowding on the south side. And that would position you to go in April of 2021. And then the longest timeline that you have is going out to November 2021. That would require a special election on your part. It certainly would give you lots and lots of time to talk about your needs, to plan a strategy. You might even be able to incorporate part of your 10-year plan into that referendum, or your discussion of the 10-year plan into the referendum. I know that there has been some discussion on budget development in terms of the new superintendent's role in the referendum, and perhaps using the timeline to go in April as a way to give that person some time to transition, learn about the needs, provide some guidance for the district, and to work with the board in terms of being able to go out into the community and talk about the referendum. It's my understanding that in budget development, the Budget Development Committee is recommending that we use the timeline for April 2021. So that's kind of where we are at this point, and I will leave you to lead the discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hardwick. So the question is, what seems more realistic to you, considering the ultimate purpose? What is doable responsibly and thoroughly? And that's, I think, what we need to consider to make this decision. Yes, Commissioner Klinkhammer.
I'm wondering if there's any information about, so that third one where you'd actually have to call a special election for the referendum. I'm wondering if there's any information out there about how do referendums fare in having to be called at a special election versus happening during a normal election time, if there's significant advantages or disadvantages to doing it that way. My instinct is that that's not a good idea. You're better off sliding them in with another election, but I don't know that to be true, and I'm wondering if there's any evidence out there, data out there about how that is.
I don't know. I think that the data that we've looked at referendums that have passed, I think have been more dependent on the communication that you've had with the community and your ability as a board and as an administration to explain to the community why a referendum is needed and what would happen if you did not win the referendum. I think those are the essential questions. Certainly in a specially called election, you might not have the turnout. It might be a lower turnout, and there's a cost associated with it. And Abby, the cost of running a special election is?
It's at least $50,000. It's probably more because we're a large district and we have so many municipalities. And then as well as if you think about the city of Eau Claire, there are probably close to 60 voting places. And so, there's ballot costs, staff costs, and then you have, the machine rental and things like that. So it will add up very quickly.
I do think that the community, I know that there have been spring election referendums in Eau Claire. Certainly we had a great success in tying our referendum to a general election. And it did bring out a number of voters that were willing to support the school district.
What do you think strategically will be the best decision? Dr. Nordin?
Well, Commissioner Harder was not at the last budget development, so when budget development recommended it, it was Dr. Bika and myself, unanimous, making the recommendation for spring. And I think the thought process was twofold: the cost and low turnout of the extended one. The more time we have to work on it, of course, the better. It'll give us time to formulate plans, listen to needs, develop the parts of it that need to be developed. But the extra cost and the potential for very low turnout in a special election sort of ruled out the November of 21. And 2020, this fall, seems very short for us, especially with the work that we have upcoming with our search for the superintendent, and to throw that superintendent into it immediately and say, in 1 month after you start, we're going to be approving this question for millions of dollars, and you're going to be responsible for helping to promote it without having any. And then, the matter of urgency, we could certainly decide not to do it on any of these dates and shoot for further down the road. But the urgency of the capital side of it, the needs for Roosevelt, the deferred maintenance there, especially, that the boundaries issue there has been settled, so we should get on taking care of Roosevelt as soon as possible, and south, and then the urgency of the overcrowding in the south side that demographic trends and facilities planning is working on right now. Those schools are not getting less full, and they are, especially Meadowview especially, is in dire need of a solution. So all of those things sort of coalesced, I think, and if I'm speaking out of turn, please jump in, for Dr. Bika and myself, and I would guess for Commissioner Harder as well, though he wasn't there at that particular meeting, to say that the spring of 2021 was the sort of, I likened it to Goldilocks, right? Too long, too short, just right. Spring 2021.
Commissioner Harder?
It's true, I wasn't at the last meeting, but looking at this, and it's also true, I am inclined towards the spring. It does seem sort of like a sweet spot. April 6, 2021 would be the date for that timeline of the election.
Yes, Dr. Bika?
I think the other things we talked about, Mark Goings attended the Budget Development Committee meeting and talked about the noise that happens, so there's less noise during an April election than a November election from a strategy perspective. We talked about Roosevelt Elementary School, just confirming that all security renovations will be addressed in summer 2020. And Ms. Kohler talked with us about the timing of actual construction, that with a November election, that date means construction is 1.5 years away. And then you've spoke to us already, but the timeline for Demo and Trends recommendations, that it seemed to best align with the recommendation that we're bringing forward.
My question would be, do you feel those who have not expressed any opinion yet, do you feel that the referendum spring 2021 is something reasonable, attainable, or do you have a reservation? Commissioner Elias?
I guess the one thing that I think is a positive to the earlier date of November is the inflationary costs of delaying these projects. And was that factored in at all? If you're, granted, it's 6 months, but I know those costs can be fairly high.
We didn't talk about it at all, and I'm looking in the audience at Daryl just because I know they do account for inflation for each year. So the estimates that we had several years ago would be low at this point in time, just because of tariffs and inflation.
Commissioner Vu?
I have not said anything partially because I missed the original meeting that we were talking about the what. And at this stage, I believe we are already talking about the how. And if I miss that much of emotional and physical connection with this topic, I cannot imagine how difficult it is for the community to understand and to be at the same page that we are. And with this magnitude of referendum, we need to have that thorough communication with the community so that we can win their support. So any proposal we decide needs to have more time for deeper conversation and understanding.
So just to be clear, do you think spring 2021 is not attainable?
I'm saying I don't have enough
Information? Okay. Commissioner Harder?
Well, in the question of what and how, I think you're right. We are talking about the how before we have totally defined the what. I don't think you really missed anything in terms of the what. But as you see these timelines laid out, we kind of have to get some picture of the how sooner rather than later, because the how includes figuring out the what. In other words, the needs assessment, going to the community, talking about, thinking with ourselves about what's needed, thinking with our staff about what's needed, thinking with the community about what's needed. So that takes time.
Yeah. Dr. Hardebeck?
So I think the only thing that would be clear now in terms of the what would be November 2020 referendum, because that would include the things that were left out of the last referendum, which were the renovations at Roosevelt and South. And it would be a very kind of contained type referendum with those two initiatives being the only things that the public would be considering. And then further out, you might have a second referendum, either the following year or the following spring, to address the overcrowding on the south side. And that would give you time then to, develop those needs assessments and talk about the what. But it is very important that you decide your timeline within the next couple of meetings, because there are so many things that you will need to do in order to plan for it.
Thank you.
It's a logistical puzzle.
I'll just add that that timeline includes opportunity to further define the what. So you didn't miss anything. I guess I feel that we have a consensus that spring 2021 is the most convenient, strategically appropriate timing for the referendum. Yes, Dr. Bika, yes. Commissioner Lidos.
So you'll vote the next time.
We'll vote next time, but just to give a sense of direction to our executives so they can start planning, because they have a lot of work ahead of them. Of course, we will too, because we will do the persuasion in the larger community and the education in the larger community, but we need to know, that timeline. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. So that was it? Was that it? Very good. So the next point in the work session agenda is discussion on coherent governance model. So all of you had the opportunity to review the reading material that talks about boards that matter and explains what our guest speaker from 2 months ago talked about, what it takes to implement the coherent governance model. Tonight I would like to invest a few minutes to continue that conversation and identify 1 or 2 additional next steps. Okay, so you had a little homework for tonight. So the idea would be for you to share with us some ideas that you got from the chapters 2 and 3 from this reading, and we'll go from there. Who would like to start? It's like in the classroom at the university. Nobody wants to get started. Thank you very much. I was counting to 30.
I think that it's important for us to keep in mind the 30,000 square foot or the 30,000 foot view in what our roles are, and not get too or into the weeds on the details of running the institution. There's lots of people that are here that are well educated and have lots of great experiences doing the jobs that they do. And, not to step on their toes, but to give, that type of oversight is one of the main takeaways that I have.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Vu?
And just to add detail to that comment, I really like the idea, and I think I have been pushing for that for a long time, and the book confirmed that. I like the idea that there are data overall the district want to go after. And data should drive the decision that we make. So I like to see data that represent different priority in the district, and the book talks about that. Not necessarily data on academic, completely data regarding priority.
Commissioner Harder?
Well, in my day job, I write computer software, and we have what are called protocols for software packages to talk to each other, protocols, so that they talk well and efficiently, and they're talking about the right things. And this is how I see this coherent governance, is it sort of keeps the conversation, the board conversation and attention focused on the places where the board has the most, should have the most impact, and tries to turn attention away from places, as Commissioner Lyons was talking about, sort of in the weeds, in the more operational things. And I think knowing how limited how limited this opportunity is to sit as a board and talk about what's on the agenda, how limited and precious that time is. Anything that can help us focus on the right kinds of discussions is something I'm interested in learning more about.
Anyone else would like to volunteer an idea?
I'll add one more comment.
Yes.
I think the book also, and the previous speaker also mentioned about separate our district and board policy. I think that speaks well to what we could try at Eau Claire.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Klinkhammer.
I just wanted to piggyback on Commissioner Lyons' topic about staying at that 30,000 level view. And I think the presentation that we received from Randy Quinn really highlighted not just that, but it also that type of governance model provides predictability for everybody. So the superintendent knows what their role is, the staff knows what their role is, the board knows what their role is, and I think that type of not just predictability, but it also engenders accountability at those different levels. And I felt like the model they presented was, it's really attractive in that way. It enables board members to stay in their pen, if you will, and everybody to kind of stay in their place. So I would just piggyback on your statement there.
Anyone else?
I guess one outcome that I would love to, I don't know, possibly achieve, I'm not sure how to exactly, but as we are kind of moving into that next phase with the superintendent applicants and interviewing, I know just from our recruitment period that many applicants are going to want to talk with us about our governance model. And it would be a tremendous outcome to me if we could, this is just my feeling, is it's great for a new superintendent to be able to come into a position and really collaborate with their board and, you know, kind of design a governance model. So in a sense, we don't want to be too far along. We want that person to be a true, you know, partner, collaborator in that journey. And it's going to be a long journey, and it's not something that you just flip a switch. You all know that. But I think that the applicants are really going to want to talk about that in the interview process, and I would love for us to have a united, you know, a shared understanding and opinion about where we think we're at. You've all said that this kind of model helps school boards be leaders and not managers, you know, and I think it also kind of spills out. I think of it as a model for a superintendent. School districts want superintendents who are leaders, not managers. And so I see it's all, there's nothing but advantages to me that come from this. And I love to be able to kind of wrap up our perspectives or values before we get into with that, you know, that very first interaction with an applicant, you know, in the interview phase.
Thank you. Would you like to share something?
This is a very classic what they said sort of situation. I mean, I only agree with all of my colleagues. It seems like we're all, without having heard specifically from you, you're nodding along, so you know, we're all sort of in agreement that this is something that we're interested in pursuing. I wonder what the next steps are. I mean, my gut reaction is to take that 4 quadrants and start hammering out the policies, you know, but like Dr. Beaker just said, we probably don't want to do that prior to bringing on the new superintendent, so we can collaborate and form them together. So I'm excited for whatever the next step is. I want to get moving on this. This seems like a positive, not only for the board, but for the administration and for the district as a whole. So I would just want to hear what people's ideas for what to do next are without getting too far down the road of having it all done.
Yes, Commissioner Harder.
It occurs to me the good news is I don't think there's any danger of us having it all done by the time the new superintendent arrives. So I think there's a lot to talk about, and it is a road. I think it will, as Dr. Pika said, I think it's going to be a long journey, but I mean, again, I do think of it kind of as protocols, and that we can start thinking of, yeah, it's made me think about protocols for how, you know, how do I interact with staff here in the district office, with staff, you know, outside the district office, with the community, and of course I've thought about those things before, but it's maybe think about it in a different way, and I think a way that I find to be, again, positive, very positive.
Thank you very much. Yes, Commissioner Vu.
Thank you. This is a work sessions, and I believe it's allowable for feedback. I sincerely believe that any model, if you put your heart into it, it will work. But in the past, we had different model, and I have seen situations where the model did not work because not everybody that used the model embraced the model. So tonight we have administrator in the building, of course, and the public. If not tonight, I wonder if there is another form out there that we can use this opportunity to get everybody on board, not to bless, not to approve, but at least allow feedback so that we are on the same page with whatever model we decide on.
That is actually a very good idea for our next step, Commissioner Wu. What I'm hearing is that we all feel the same about the role that the board plays. Is, as you said, being able to keep the large picture in mind, not get into the weeds. It is important for us to have information and data available in a timely manner to do this work of verification of how far, how close we are from our goals as a district. We need to have clear our protocols, mechanisms that are in place for this communication and this communication to flow and interaction to happen. And we all need to have a clear idea of how the flows go in terms of processes. Reading the book after the presentation of our guest speaker, and then reading the book, I think that it offers us a sort of template, because there's not going to be a unique way, a unique outcome. It will depend on multiple elements, but it gives us a template, and it suggests that if we work within the template, then what we make, what we decide, what we do will make sense. It will be coherent. So I was doing this reverse process, deconstructing what we are doing currently with the board. I mean, I've been in the board for several months, a couple cycles at least in a row, and there's a cycle, right? There's one kind of very specific information that comes to us on a repetitive base for us to consider and approve or not. So, and they are from all the different executives and from our superintendent. So that flow of information is there, and it makes sense to us to receive it at certain times of the year, because that's the time when the cycle is completed. We don't call it coherent governance model, but actually our model makes sense. So I don't think we are too far from the model that is proposed in that book, that is, by the presenter. That is, knowing that throughout the year we have certain kinds of information that we need to receive and approve or verify and certify that the goals are met. Right? The last stamp of you met the goal, we don't do necessarily in a predictable way. It's just assumed that we are approving those, but perhaps we need a little bit more intention, or more to be more deliberate in saying, okay, we're closed and we move forward. But actually the flow of information and the speed with which the decisions are made is there. But that's my interpretation. Perhaps that's why I was saying that Commissioner Wu's idea was a good one, in the sense that, how about our counterparts within the district? We would like to have an opportunity to converse with all the executives and see how do they feel the rhythms go, and to what extent they feel that they're getting enough feedback from us, both in sense of direction and in sense of approval. That could be a good work session. The same with the superintendent. Because I have heard more than just a few times, we need direction, we need direction, we need you to make a decision. Well, that's our role, right? So perhaps we need to fine-tune that process of giving direction and giving approval, which, if you think, is what the coherent governance model requires, to have a steady pace in the process so everybody's happy and what we do is predictable. My only concern or it's not a concern. My only the only aspect that I would carefully consider is that whatever process we put in place doesn't trump the ultimate purpose, which is that we give appropriate direction to the operations in the district. Or let me take that back. Our focus needs to be always need to be focused on the goals of the district. And we should not engage ourselves in a process just because of the process. Does that make sense? Because we don't have time to engage in process more than we already do. So as long as we are focused on the ultimate goals, then we should be okay. So I didn't mean to wrap up the conversation, but the time is passing, and perhaps I would suggest, though, to finish is in our next work session, we will request the participation of our executives and the superintendent to give us some feedback about this conversation and some perhaps expectations to make our process more coherent. Does that make sense? Okay. Thank you. I'll need to hear the recording to remember what I said. Okay, thank you very much. The last point in the agenda is, for the work session, is long-term planning. And that comes from an idea that I shared with you at the beginning of this fiscal year, and that is that I would like to see us providing leadership and inspiration to our community in the long-term goals for the educational purposes, for our educational purposes. And that, of course, goes tied to the referendum. But it's not just the referendum. It's that we need to have a vision for our school district, for our city, in terms of where do we want to be in 10 years, where do we want to be in 20 years, and what is it that we need to do to get there. So as we are preparing for the referendum, I thought, would have a great opportunity to invite all the stakeholders and community members to provide input in that long-term envisioning process. I'm thinking in that will provide our referendum effort with a lot of meat, and by that I mean ultimate purpose. It's not just that we need to build additional square footage for students. It's not that we might need to build an additional school or expand whatever we have that is expandable, but actually what is going to happen inside those spaces, but not only in those additional spaces, but in the spaces that we already have, in terms of what how much more educational opportunities we can offer, how much more professional development opportunities we can offer for our staff, how many additional new educational opportunities we can offer to our students and also our community. Thinking out loud, I would say things like, and thinking, boldly and ambitiously, to what extent that we are in Eau Claire ready to offer, for example, the International Baccalaureate program, thinking in the way the world is evolving, the kind of skills that our students are required to function efficiently in a globalized society and economy. This kind of curricular program certainly offers very successful possibilities, or possibilities to be more successful. In the same way as our community is faced with greater, larger challenges, basic responsibilities that we have as neighbors, as parents, as friends, as community members change. And when you are a friend, when you are a father, when you are a mother, when you are a caregiver, your responsibilities don't come with a guide, right? Well, how about we start thinking about scaffolding those processes for our community members, our fellow Eau Clairians, and think about that as an educational opportunity that can be provided from our district. How to be a better parent, how to be a better caregiver, how to be a better friend and colleague. Those are things that will never be not needed. And I think that we have an opportunity to think along those terms when we're thinking about a vision for 10 and 20 years. What roadmaps can we offer to our teachers and our staff members? How many staff members do we have that we see them as, great teachers? We've seen them developing in their job positions, and how can we help them scaffold the process for them to be that teacher that we need instead of looking for, outside? That's an opportunity that we have because we know the people, and we know who could, benefit from those additional investments as a district. So those are the things that and many more, that I had in mind when I said, well, let's have an envision and long-term planning session. And how do we operationalize this, if that's a word? When we are planning for the referendum, we can invite that input in those listening sessions, provided that we alert the people that this is going to happen. So that's what I wanted to share with you. You're nodding. Yes, Commissioner Harder.
Well, since this was first mentioned, this idea, I think there was maybe a year 2030 attached to it at one point. And I mean, it's the 10-year vision, though, so it makes sense. It adds up. And I do like that way of looking at it, because this is, as long as it would take us as a board to move, and as with our staff here, to move towards a coherent governance picture, we know that's a long road, but moving the school can also be an even bigger job. It's a bigger boat to turn, even still. So, with the understanding that we would hope to make, as we always do, to make positive change and improvement in the short term, but to envision that long-term objective, I think, is a very valuable exercise. One of the first places I think of is to understand how our staff is feeling, in the buildings, in the classrooms, the principals and the teachers and the other staff who work every day in these schools, and just get some sense from them of what's working, what's not, and what what the future could look like would be a very interesting piece of this for me.
Thank you. Commissioner Lang?
When do you see this commencing? Do you have kind of a timeline in your mind, or is it something that's still open for molding?
Well, I was thinking that we could move forward with this process simultaneously with the referendum, because in that way people will understand that the referendum is not just an appeal for an increased funding support, but it's an appeal for increased funding support to accomplish this. Dr. Pika?
So those of you who suffered through agenda setting with me for this meeting heard me say that this is a little bit of chicken and egg for me. One of the principles of coherent governance is when you're talking about vision. So it's the board's duty to decide what the organization should look like and achieve. A superintendent or other important players can contribute to that vision, but it's the board's responsibility to translate owner expectations into statements of aspiration that create meaningful future for the organization, which is exactly what you're talking about. But what I'm struggling with is, although I don't disagree that there are elements of coherent governance in what we already do, but for me, what I can't fully understand yet is in this model, a board governs through policy, not by, so again, kind of one of the principles, a board governs through policy, not approvals. So traditionally, boards control operational decisions by either approving or not approving administrative recommendations. Coherent governance says that boards should do it through well-crafted policy. And I don't really think we're there yet. I think we primarily function through the approval process. And so I don't know how to move into visioning until I know kind of my role, and that is kind of as a policy leader as opposed to an approving manager type. And I've said before, I don't want to ever vote on another iPad again. And that's been my, I kind of always go back to that when I do that, I lose sight of my best role, and so that's what coherent governance comes first for me before vision, and that's right. But that may be my limitation.
Thank you. Commissioner Gu?
Before we go too far, well, first I just want to say thank you for the inspiring thought about visioning for the future. I believe it's due that we do that again. We had our strategic, but sooner or later there will need to be visit to see where we were and where we're heading. I just want to maybe add one more detail, that when we move along this path, we take advantage of what we did in the past, where we identify who in the board are more visionary. In other words, more naturally good at or passionate, so that we can fully utilize their ideas and not expecting that, why didn't you not contributing? Or how can I'm good at implementing, I'm not good at visioning. So we don't lose sight of how to utilize our board in a way that we are good at. So keep that in mind.
Thank you. Well, the idea was just to have this opportunity to tie the long-term planning with the referendum planning, and my guess is that envisioning the future will not stop our process of becoming more aware, intentional about how we conduct our business as board. So they don't oppose, I think. They don't oppose. As we envision something, I'm sure that we can find a way to be coherent about it in terms of how to create that policy. The presenter, both the presenter and the book indicate that while the model offers important processes to follow, the outcome is not going to be the same all the time, and that not all the pieces that are described in the model work for everyone and everywhere. So it's only as we move forward that we will verify that. So how about we agree on having another work session in the near future to hear what the executives and the superintendent have to suggest us to be more coherent, and then that will be our next step. Is that all right? Yes? Good, thank you. So at this point, I would like to ask for future agenda items. Hearing none at this moment, please feel free to forward them to me. The agenda setting committee will meet. We have a new pattern. Tomorrow, it's tomorrow. Okay, we will meet tomorrow for the setting of the agenda, and that's it for tonight. I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn. If you don't want,
so
I'll
moved.
I'll second.
And a second. Those who agree, please say aye. Aye. Then meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the Eau Claire Area School Board. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.